Hello and welcome to another Third Age Babylon 5 podcast special. As you can see, this is our third installment of Earth Alliance history, where we are going to look at the history of Earth and humanity in the Babylon 5 universe, as told by the Earth Alliance factbook of the Moon Goose role-playing game. As you can see, as usual, this is going to be a discussion between Micah and me, and we are going to do this the same way as we've done for the past few things. We are going to look at milestones in Earth Alliance history, and we are going to first kind of discuss how do we think these milestones might have played out, and then we look at what the good book actually says, and we will kind of compare and see how does this relate to the rich world that JMS originally envisioned. We should also mention that this rulebook is by no means a canon source. It's about as valid as anything that we come up with, but we use this as kind of as a baseline of what ideas people had relatively close to when the show released compared to what we now have for ideas a good odd 30 years later. So far, so good?
Perfect.
In this case, maybe let's do a little bit of a recap of how far we've come so far, because we've now kind of started with Earth Alliance history in a place where humanity is just on Earth, a bunch of bickering nations slowly unifying, and we are now getting close. I can give you this as kind of a little bit of an overview for what we're talking about today. We are getting now into events that are still taking place long before the show, but that are playing much more directly into the show. I don't think in Babylon 5 anybody has really talked about a lot about the horrors of World War III up to this point. But we're now getting into an area where we are encountering a lot of factions and a lot of people that maybe people have already mentioned in the show, that for the characters of the show are much closer to their everyday life.
Yeah, I somewhat remember when we discussed the last time.
I mean, yeah. Just to say very broadly, we saw that. Oh my God, a big war's breaking out. Humanity got kind of united, but nobody was really happy about that. We saw that there was a lot of expansion, and I think one big takeaway there was for us that there was a lot of private expansion into space. I mean, we see Elon Musk in the news a lot more recently. So I saw recently people sharing the clip from, I think, Star Trek Discovery, where he was mentioned alongside the great inventors of the warp drive. So this might be that Star Trek kind of jumped the gun on throwing out some praises there for historical figures before they're dead. I think there might be a reason.
Is that a good idea?
I think there might be a reason why we usually wait a little bit longer to kind of see if that legacy actually ends up being as great as we make it out to be. But oh well. Then we saw humanity came into contact with the Centauri, which was a great big shock, but also a great big opportunity, because the Centauri love making money, humans love making money, and everybody was very happy about that. Unfortunately, the Centauri also really love conquering everybody, which has led to the situation, and this is where we ended up last time, that humanity stumbles on a pretty empty galactic stage and finds itself pretty quickly as one of the few major powers that remain. There's basically just the Centauri and their big republic in decline. There is the Narn, who have really taken advantage of weaker neighbors and kind of built themselves up as this big regime as a resistance to the republic. And now there's humanity, which was just kind of in a convenient position. We were found at a point where the Centauri didn't want to risk a big war, and now we had a bunch of time to make money, build up a big fleet, and kind of, play with the big boys in the galactic playground. And with this out of the way, we've talked a little bit about how we do this, how do we imagine the next milestones, what's in the fact book, how do the two compare. I will also throw out very briefly all the little information about the fact book. All the little milestones that we are describing will be annotated with the pages where they're actually mentioned in the book, if somebody wants to get a hold of the scans of the book itself and to read further into this, because we are currently on page 17 or so of a few hundred pages in this book. There's a lot of details in here that we are not talking about. So if anybody wants to do that, this is going to be a little guide to that. But this is where we go to the first waypoint, and our first milestone is going to be the question, what is going to disrupt this beautiful balance that humanity finds itself in? We've seen humanity overcome its internal struggles. It's been on decently good terms with the Centauri. There were some confrontations with the Narn, but they were mostly resolved by this point. It's this golden age of expansion, and obviously that can't last. So the question is, who's going to be the first enemy that we encounter, and what fueled them? And no worries, I wouldn't ask that question if there wasn't a small chance that you knew the answer from watching the show.
Yes, I do remember that it was mentioned in there, but I don't remember who it was.
I mean, I'm not. This is not going to be a school test. You don't get points for remembering dates and names, but broadly describing it, maybe like what memories do float up if we are talking about like what was Earth's first big enemy like?
Yeah, that's the problem. I do not remember this because my head is so full with other information and obviously very unuseful bullshit. My brain just thought, oh, that's interesting.
That must have been the Dilgar War or somebody like that, like system lords that we encounter. Weren't they like the first enemies of Earth?
Would be an interesting crossover.
A different turn of
Both.
events.
Yeah, but honestly, I am actually more of a Wraith fan than the Goa'uld.
See,
Because
that
the
was
whole
okay.
parasitic stuff was not up my alley.
Too many wiggly worms. No, but if it was the Wraith, I don't think would have history much longer anymore. So let's be glad they're in a different galaxy. Might still be a crossover. Might be a ship getting stranded in the Pegasus galaxy that turns out Babylon 5 was Stargate all along. Who knows? They have hyperspace gates, so it's close enough. In that case, I'm going to give you a hint. It was very early on in season 1. We had the episode Deathwalker. And does this ring bells?
Oh, it feels like ages. I always wanted to.
It was ages ago.
I really wanted to rewatch season 1. Since I was actually trying to get my partner on the track with B5. So far I wasn't able to do so. Damn it.
Deathwalker
No, I
was a very cat-like lady who came on board on the ship only to immediately get punched really hard by Natov. I think this might be the moment that was most in your memory because you like Natov a lot, because of the whole Blood Oath thing, who was a massive war criminal for doing experiments on the people and such. And she was, to move this over to our little quote section here, a Dilgar. From the Dilgar Imperium, a species from the farthest corners of known space, where this race dwelt. And in this episode, it is talked very briefly about the backdrop of the Dilgar War.
yes, the Dilgar War.
That rings. That's good because for most of humanity in the Babylon 5 universe, that would be kind of the history lesson that they remember, and it would be part of history. Like I think kind of the parents, grandparents generation would have been most involved in that kind of thing. And it's mentioned very briefly in the episode, but the whole idea is that the Dilgar learn that their sun will explode in a big supernova much too soon, much sooner than it should be exploding, and this kind of prompts this warlike species to go on a massive invasion of basically the whole universe because they want to find a new home planet, and apparently asking for help is just too difficult, so
Yeah.
it turns into a massive conflict.
Yeah, I'm afraid just Dilgar War is something that I remember, but the whole thing around it is I think is completely lost. Though I memorized it as yeah the first assault, or at least the assault or war before humanity had to face off with the Minbari.
And I mean, that's the important bit. This is much better than you having a perfect memory of the Deathwalker episode and being like, yeah, well, let's just retread the same ground that we've already gotten. But yeah, but this is what most of this episode, or all of this episode, is actually going to be about, is the beginning of the Dilgar War. And let's kind of go through this and see both like historically and kind of with the history of Babylon 5 as we know it, how all of this compares. And I might also throw in a few references to other sci-fi in there. But I mean, you're perfectly right. This is the big war that humanity engages in before the Minbari become a threat. And this is a war that goes very well for humanity. And I think one of the big reasons we see here is it's a war by the Dilgar Imperium, which despite its, pompous name, is actually a very young species, a species that has not all that much in terms of technology and is kind of running from a massive threat. Is that, as a plot point, something that you would draw parallels to other stories to, or something that kind of rings a bell?
Mm, my mind is still occupied with the idea of yeah, there's a catastrophe coming in, and um that the overall, maybe the idea between, or the difference between an apocalypse and a catastrophe is that after an apocalypse we have a new world, a new order, a new kind of state. A catastrophe is ending things. There is nothing new, nothing left there, and therefore that's what they are trying to avoid or getting away from, which is in itself a really strong and really emotional understanding motivation. The overall idea of, yeah, we start a war and just don't ask for help, um, is interesting. I mean, I can imagine reasons why they are acting this way. I don't know enough about this whole situation, about getting real ideas, but um, I could imagine that they had bad interactions, bad first experiences, and therefore are trying to solve this in this really intense and extreme way, maybe to avoid being used. Like it's maybe like we don't want to be dependent on someone else or another race or um, whatever, just to survive and completely lose ourselves, our culture, and what we've worked so far. Because I can totally see this happening, because they're if you imagine the Centauri, if you would go there and in their situation and ask for help, I'm pretty sure the Centauri would say, yeah, sure, we can help you, but. And
It's like, we've already prepared some work camps for you on these lovely other planets where you can go and live. Yeah.
exactly, I can totally see this happening. And if they had some experience, or maybe just some whispers, what is possible, what can happen outside of their own realm, um, I could understand it, even though it's of course still stupid, looking on this from the outside. Um, because it's not like there's just one group out there. So
I mean, you touch on something that is very interesting. This book, we talked about this the last few times, is not universally regarded as a masterpiece, especially with a show like Babylon 5, where the writing is generally regarded as very good. Anything that is added on by a different author, you have to take with a grain of salt. In this instance, we kind of have this issue of, oh, well, the Dilgar are bad guys, and they are bad guys because they are warlike, and because they are warlike, they would never ask for help, which is a very simplistic reason. And I mean, for all the reasons you've just laid out, we can kind of talk about there being justifiable reasons for that. I mean, every other species they encounter has been bombed into the Stone Age by the Centauri. So yeah, of course, asking for help is not something that you're easily gonna do, but it's a much more simplistic view on species than Babylon 5 usually takes. Then again, I'm happy to accept this because we are reading this history from the perspective of Earth Alliance, explaining to us why this war went great and we defeated the bad guys and they left us no other choice to do so. So it's kind of
Yes.
this thing like, I mean, what we know from Earth Alliance, not from Earth Alliance, what we know from the Deathwalker episode is that at least by the end, the Dilgar were unapologetically committing the worst possible atrocities and definitely like an absolutely horrible thing. We don't really need to look for justifications for that because most of the stuff that they did with like biological warfare and stuff is unjustifiable. But I think it's fair to say that there might have been possibly a more complicated history leading to that point than the fact book makes it out to be. Nevertheless, I think it's an interesting setup, and I mean, with Layla, I had a phase where we were looking a lot into things like the migration that occurred near the end of the ancient times, which led partially to the fall of Rome and stuff like that, or even further back, the Bronze Age collapse. And like throughout history, you have these ideas of massive invasions happening, which are in reality just kind of migratory events of like entire big populations just kind of moving about. And as kind of a setup for the biggest invasion that people remember in the Babylon 5 universe, that it's just an entire species trying to get away from an exploding sun, I kind of like that idea. And no, it's a setup that I feel like has some interesting implications.
If you have this kind of informations that you just put out, it really turns kind of interesting because there's so much different ways of watching this and interpreting this. If you don't have this, it's a really old way of telling a story, like they're the bad guys because they're the bad guys, and they're the bad guys because they're bad. On this kind of term, I don't know, if you go to something rather simple, like the story of Snow White. Why is the witch trying to kill her? Yeah, because she's bad. Duh. Why are you asking? So on this kind of level, we're here, and therefore I think it's there are possible ways to make this really interesting setting, and of course, as you stated, this is from the angle of Earth Alliance history. But it also tells us, if we accept this as just a given and not criticize the writing itself, it feels like there was no real development in looking at history. If you have to look at it now from what is actually happening, like research is still going on. There are new perspectives applied to so many things that are already considered established, and then realizing, oh yeah, maybe that was just a really simple way of viewing it until now. And in this case, it's also the same. It's like once said, like, yeah, we beat the bad guys, and then just left it as it was, and there's no no development to a higher self in some way.
And I think you bring us to a very important point, which we touched on last time a little bit, but in this conflict comes even more to the forefront. Exactly what you described, that there has not really been an evaluation of this history. People have kind of accepted the first interpretation and moved on from it. That is canonically very much what happened, right? Like, this is why we get the Minbari War afterwards, and this is why Babylon 5 is such an important step, because this entire war with the Dilgar happens, and nobody really learned from this. Everybody went out of this war with a very wrong perception. I mean, in this regard, it's almost a little bit like, how we usually imagine people went into World War One because they had this completely warped view of warfare dating back to the Napoleonic age, where they imagined, oh yeah, by Christmas we're home again. We just kind of, march on Paris and take it, and then it's gonna be easy, and it's gonna be just a normal thing. And I feel like this is a lot what happened with the Dilgar War here as well. It sets this establishment that it establishes this precedent that a big galactic war is some bad guys coming in and they pose a massive threat, and then they are swiftly defeated, and then everything is kind of neatly packaged, and you don't have to deal with a lot of fallout from that. And I feel like a lot of the problems that we see in Babylon 5, the show, what people struggle with, goes back to this idea that they had this very simple view of history and kind of never evolved that from there.
Yeah, and also not just the history, but also the overall idea of what are the no, that's the wrong way of saying it. Let me try again. Not just history, but the overall of it idea, what is it that makes a person a person? Like, I mean, we still have this problem of thinking us against them, or me against the other. But this is a very, very simplified way of thinking. Of course, for our daily lives, it is easier to think that way. But on the other hand, we do not do the everyone out of ourselves and the world enough justice, because we want to be evaluated with everything there is to us, with our thoughts, our dreams, with our history, what kind of experience we make that formed us to the point that we're at this moment. And we do not grant this wish of being seen with all these kind of elements to the others outside of ourselves. And therefore this idea of the bad guys can establish, because I just reduce them to not having problems, wishes, dreams, and not thinking about this, at least for once, in this kind of confrontation, war, or anything. Just makes sure that you will repeat your mistakes so far, because you do not regard the other person, group, whatever, as a complete human being, or in this case, a living being.
And I mean, this kind of brings us back to the episode where, I mean, spoiler alert, we know how this war is going to end in the chronicle of Earthline's history. The Dilgar eventually are all wiped out because their sun does explode and takes their entire world with them. And I think this is one of the reasons why this very simplified view of history in Babylon 5 can remain, because you have these Dilgar that show up and invade, commit a bunch of horrible atrocities, and then vanish completely. And so there's never a moment where anybody has to kind of reckon with that, which is very different. The relationship between the Minbari and humans is very complicated and strained, because the Minbari committed all kinds of acts and were just about genociding all of humanity by the looks of it. And now the war is over, but both species are still around, and they kind of have to exist next to each other. And you can easily imagine, if the Dilgar hadn't been completely wiped out, if they were now part of the galactic community, there would have had to have been a lot more reckoning. Like, do you blame the government that they had at the time? Do you blame everybody that participated? Was there such a thing as an innocent Dilgar civilian or not? Which incidentally is something that we see in discussions like to this day about conflict zones, and this question, like, at what point can you justify writing off an entire people?
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to dwell too much on this who to blame part, because I think this is
It's one of the few
something that
conflicts where it's very uncomplicated. You have to blame the Dilgar in this conflict.
but usually there's more than one person. most of the time, so not every time, but yeah, that's not the point I want to go on, but that there is no one left that can stand for their history, that has an interest there. And maybe there are in this fictional world, maybe there are some people that are interested. Okay, what actually happened, and well, would be interested to see how this whole Dilgar Imperium worked out and what motives they have. But I'm not sure that even if there were people interested in looking for the truth or for more depth in the history, that there would be enough of a backup or a lobby to support this and transmigrate this into the history itself. Just like, yeah, there's this weird guy that's researching the Dilgar Imperium that doesn't even exist, and the planets are get atomized, and yeah, why bother? It's like, let's ignore him. He doesn't have anything important to say.
The one thing that we know the galactic community still grapples with is this idea that there has never been any kind of actual retribution or justice for this war that has happened. I think this is why in Deathwalker it's such a big deal that we see Deathwalker and she's the first Dilgar that somebody could actually, put on trial for all the stuff that at least she has committed, and then this opportunity was denied everyone also by the Vorlons. I will have to take this cat and put it away because she's just too loud. So I think there's definitely this element of we can't really reckon either with the existence of this species and what that meant and what drove them to this horrible war, and we also can't really close up with this war because it is always this unfinished business where nobody could be put to trial, where nobody could pay any kind of reparations for this. We just kind of have to leave it as a fact of history and live with it, and this ends up being this very simplified history. Before we go too much further, I mean, this is a very good starting point, but let's move on to the next milestone. I mean, all of these are thematically going to be in the same vein, but I think they're going to maybe move us thematically a little bit through a discussion that moves forward. And this is the question, like, okay, the Dilgar have noticed their sun is going to explode. How do they go about invading everybody? Because it is the show doesn't really tell us much about this. The fact but goes a little bit into detail and says, well, it's more complicated than just, oh, we attack everyone, declare war on everyone, because I mean, then the war wouldn't have been threatening. Then the Dilgar would have just been immediately conquered by everyone. So what is it that makes the Dilgar invasion well, yeah, well, how do they even go about this? How do they start?
If I imagine myself to be part of the Dilgar and I have this information of an exploding sun that's coming closer and closer, and I'm, for whatever reason, unable to ask for help and due to an invasion, I would go look for a quick way to evacuate everyone. It has to be obviously a place where like a planet that has the right living circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it has to be a planet or planets, depending on the amount of people. A planet that I can conquer easy or quick. And I'm sure distance is, or the way to travel there is also part of the of the considerations I have to make. And I could imagine that it fell on not you wouldn't start a war with everyone, because if you as a lonely emperor start hitting on everyone out there, they hit back, and then there's nothing left of you. So I would start it just with one to keep it down and not make the impact on myself too big. And I could imagine that they were thinking, okay, the Nans already, not the Nans, the Centauri, conquered already quite a real lot. So even if they were aware of the declining of the empire, you still wouldn't mess with them, just of the how large they've become. The Narns, I could imagine, I mean, they were the ones that sold weapons to the humans. Therefore, I'm pretty sure they had like were kind of considered like, okay, they are maybe not as developed as the Centauri, but they have a lot of fucking weapons, so better not mess with them. Oh, and then we have these little humans that are maybe expanding quite a quick way compared to others, but they are the new ones and therefore might be considered the least dangerous ones, maybe also with the lack of informations, just because they were new to the playground. So maybe the humans just managed to fit the most criteria for a new living place for the Dilgar.
There's two sides to this answer, and both of them are correct, but in different ways, which is interesting. I mean, to start off with, you've hit on all the most important things that were important to the Dilgar invasion in the beginning, which is one, we need something that goes fast and that is compatible with us. I don't know if you remember in season 1, we saw quite often the Abai ambassador, which has this like big mohawk fin because they're kind of fish people, which their watery planet for the Dilgar was a terrible target to hit because they couldn't really live there. So that is absolutely a concern that is explicitly mentioned. It is also correct that out of the 3 big players at the time, the Dilgar had pretty much exactly the reaction that you were talking about. Like, we don't want to mess with the Centauri Republic. They're obviously conquerors themselves. The Narn just managed to defeat the Centauri Republic in some fashion, so they are probably too strong. Humanity is kind of the newcomer. They are not what we are worried about. As a first attack target, though, the Dilgar went after the plethora of very minor nations that we now know as the League of Non-Aligned Worlds. And at the time, what they did is exactly like you described, find somebody who is as isolated as possible, who nobody else will really come to help, somebody who's relatively weak so we can defeat them quickly, and then just do that. I've mentioned here in these little quotes, just to hammer home again, the Dilgar are really not a very advanced threat. Most of the technology has been stolen. There's this entire phase where they kind of, just go around pretending to be friends and do a whole lot of industrial espionage. Reminded me a little bit, especially with when this book was written in like the early 2000s, reminds me a little bit of, the early perception of China as a new rising power. They're just getting all the industrial prowess and stealing a lot of stuff and doing, bootleg versions of everything to kind of acquire the technology to then replicate that. That seems to be kind of a theme with the Dilgar as well. And then, just like you mentioned, they selected one of the weakest independent powers and just hammered them home. And we start seeing what is also later then mentioned about them in the Deathwalker episode, that they very quickly go into absolute atrocity mode and just kill everyone with a bunch of bioengineered weapons, essentially. Just broadly to that, any talking points? Otherwise, I have some parallels that I find interesting.
Go ahead.
I mean, one of the ones that I find kind of neat is if we accept that the Dilgar are kind of portrayed as the, unquestionable bad guys, and their first move is to go conquering a planet and then killing most of the population. gosh, where have we seen this in Babylon 5 before? It's almost like the Centauri are starting to resemble kind of the worst possible enemies. And, this is kind of what we legitimately have seen. The Centauri have attacked the Narn, which they view as a fairly vulnerable target. They've done so by kind of underhanded means. They've used weapons of mass destruction. They used mass drivers, not biological weapons, but the effect is the same. Most people are dead. And they're also now going on this rampage of kind of attacking everyone bit by bit, always going for the weakest ones. So I like this as a kind of parallel that is happening here.
Definitely.
The one big other thing is, and maybe the part that we can talk about a little bit, is it's less interesting. I mean, we're looking at this for Earth history. It's less interesting what this tells us about the Dilgar. That's nothing new after what we've already talked about. But this tells us a lot about the galactic situation at this point, because there is somewhat this League of Non-Aligned Worlds, but they're not helping each other. They are consistently regarding this as somebody else's problem, which has been kind of what we've seen Earth exploit, but which is also, I guess, we talked about them finding a rather empty galactic stage. I mean, this is exactly what it is. There's a bunch of different species that are all just kind of fending for their own. Let's move this along.
I had a few ideas maybe to your last statement. With
Let me move back on the slides and we can go right into these. Yes.
with the idea of everyone is fending. Now let me try again. The idea of everyone is fending for themselves is, of course, or at least in my perspective, always strongly attached to fear of the responsibilities. Because if I help someone in this kind of situation, like if the Dilgar are attacking race X and I go and help them, then the Dilgar could also attack me if we do not win. And on the other hand, of course, there's always this idea of, but if I help them, what do I get of this? And usually, especially in the section of politics and why are we helping them? We have enough problems ourselves. Like, this is the usual take on these, or at least it feels to me like this is the most regarded argument for not helping others. There's like I think the recent one that just keeps stuck in my head is that Germany is paying, I don't know where, like Rwanda or something, like Africa or somewhere. They're getting money from Germany for helping build a better industry, civilization, whatever. And this money especially was used or is used for bicycle lanes or routes. And everyone is, why are we supporting, why are we constructing bicycle lanes in Africa? What these people do not understand is that apart from the whole part of plundering Africa for ages, that should be repaid by now, is that it's not like we are building them. We are giving money there so that they can build something that supports the nation, the people, make a better living. And maybe and they decided, okay, we are building bicycle lines with this to get people from A to B without using cars or whatever, because maybe it's something that is affordable for the people. There's so much context missing, but people are judging it. And why are we giving them money? We could build our own bicycle lines we do not have. It's always this, I do not want to share what I have. And
I think it's a beautiful example, especially with these bicycle paths, because it's one of these instances where you see something that is not intuitive or maybe just plain stupid, and now the discussion is about that. It's about bicycle paths, which I find so interesting, or idiotic, because I mean, here in Germany we have entire like TV programs that are just about showcasing instances of really stupid investment. To have this instance where a bicycle path is built along the road, and then a different bureau is responsible for road safety, so the barriers along the road are just built straight over the bicycle path, which immediately negates that. Or you have people, building a traffic light at a road that is never ever used, or a railway crossing that needs an entire train worker to operate just for one house on the other side. Like all of these instances where you can very legitimately also say that is a stupid investment. Just how I can imagine, maybe it's actually very true to say, oh, this random country in the middle of Africa, maybe there are better ways to apply this money than building bicycle paths. It's very possible, but you have this entire show in Germany, and nobody is looking at this show and looking at these instances of nonsensical investment and saying, we shouldn't invest more money in infrastructure. That's obviously a stupid thing. Like, no, the problem here is that individual cases occur where people are corrupt or not paying attention or not doing their job very well on a local level, and so the investment is put into something stupid. That doesn't mean that the entire concept of investing in infrastructure is a stupid idea. Nobody's going to argue that. But if it happens in a country elsewhere in the world, we see somebody investing into bicycle paths, which may or may not be a stupid investment, but nobody asks, oh, what the fuck happened there on this local level? Everybody is immediately, see, this is why we shouldn't put any money into this entire continent.
yeah.
Which is like a weird double standard to have. And like in many of these instances, I find it interesting just to compare, like, how do people react to the same thing happening at home or abroad? Because usually it's a very different reaction, and it's kind of telling in these instances. Anyway, long side tangent about bicycle paths.
Yeah, but the essential point here is just, it's like, why should we give, in this case, money? It always goes back to money. Is it weapons? Is it health support? Is it whatever kind of you could kind of help? You could send a planet, a country, or whatever in this situation to support them. It's always, yeah, why should we do this? Why should we waste money, time, people, whatever, on someone else when there are problems that we have on our own? And not understanding that, yeah, we're all part of the same universe in regards of Babylon 5, and everything will affect us in some way, even if it's just some really small things we will realize or will be affecting us in decades or years. But it's just this turning around and it's not worth it. So why bother? It's not our problem, and then turning around. And I can totally see this happening. Also in the regards of, if you look at the Centauri Republic, of course, if I totally can see that there's fear of, if we help others that are in jeopardy, and then maybe conquered through the Centauri, they will come to us because we helped them. On the other hand, maybe if all of these groups would have helped each other out, maybe they wouldn't have fallen to the Centauri Republic. So everyone just decided to do nothing, and that's usually the worst you can do.
What makes this even more difficult in the Babylon 5 universe is the fact that we are not talking about a situation where you have a bunch of different, races that had, maybe some past history or such with some disagreements. It's often the very real consideration. Well, if I help the Drazi not get conquered right now, they might win the war and then turn around and try to conquer me.
Yeah.
I might legitimately be investing into my past enemy and future enemy, which, as much as we harken on the fact that people should realize that sticking together is better, there are very real considerations. Like in the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, you don't want to be the one idiot helping everybody else out, and then everyone just takes advantage of that. That would be a real bad situation. And I think a big part of why that understanding doesn't really come about is that the Babylon 5 universe in this era never had a status quo that worked for everyone, or anyone for that matter. So there's not really a sense for any of these species to be like, if we just kind of preserve everything as is, that's better than the massive invasion coming in. For them, it's probably like, well, maybe if we don't help anybody out, the Dilgar might attack the Centauri, and everybody wins if that happens. So let's just gamble on that. I think it's this thing which differentiates the Babylon 5 universe from our universe. I dare say that I think in our universe there have been certain times in relatively recent Earth history where we felt like, okay, maybe there is a status quo that is generally better than trying to go for some massive upheaval. That's certainly still a very Eurocentric perspective to take, and certainly not true for everyone, but I think there is a bigger sense of that in our history than in the history of Babylon 5 at that point.
Yes, and I'm pretty sure on my part that one reason of this is that it's like looking for okay, what do we have in common? What is it what we all want? And trying to work this, like the human rights. And since in B5 there's not something like that, there is no ground on they can debate with each other, they can come together, which then later is the idea of B5 to establish something like that.
I mean, it's even this thing, we have this example here, the Dilgar go out and they create a bunch of biological weapons to kill most of a planet's population. I'm sure everybody is gonna agree that this is a bad thing to do and you really shouldn't do it, but this isn't a universe where anything like international law exists or, general rules of war or Geneva Convention. So even if anybody agrees that this is a bad thing, there isn't really any kind of formalized framework to articulate that properly or to, point toward or even try to create some consequences. And I think this is, especially if we look at our real world, there's often a lot of debate and doubt, like what's even the point of a United Nations, what's the point of international law, what's the point of an international court of law if those can't really enforce peace in the same way that maybe we would like them to. But even just the existence of this kind of framework is something that has a certain amount of weight that is completely missing in the case of Babylon 5 here. Whether or not that's enough is a completely different question, but we just kind of see that we have a very blank slate of a universe here, and that is showing some negatives.
Give me a sec. I have to think how to phrase it. There was I watched this interestingly a comedian that was talking about the I think you could describe it or translate it as a democratic tiredness, because there are a lot of people who are the democratic. It's so problematic and the democracy, and he managed to make it in a fun way, talking about how of the overall idea of what it actually means, and I was talking about what that the Constitution is. The first part is like the people, or the in German it's the Volk, das Volk.
Yeah, that's correct.
The people.
I mean, you should specify that you're talking about the German Constitution, not the US one, because that's usually what people think of by.
Yes, of course, of course. The part is that I don't get it together whole, but he was like, yeah, but nowhere there is a definition of what are the people, and that's kind of the beginning, and in the end, it's his I think coming beautifully together that the people are a group of person that decide that they have this that they want this constitution to have. Like everyone, you can it's like committing faith to something, to find the baseline we want to act and interact and be treated. And you have to get to this point of we want this. This is how we want to live with each other. Which is developed through time of history, what we experience, what we've learned through history, what we do not want to experience again. And to reach this point, you have to reflect on history, on yourself, and obviously on the future. What do we want? Where do we want to go? And this is completely missing so far in D5. The idea of what do we want in the future? How do we want the future to be, to look like? How do we want to interact with each other in the future and now, of course? And this as a whole is missing. So far, at least the way it's presented everywhere is kind of sad.
I think if you're talking about German constitution in particular, usually you get to this point because there's some sort of inciting incident that gets, fortunately, in most cases, so bad that it really warrants sitting down and thinking about, okay, how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Or like, what do we want to aspire to do? And I think the sad irony in the case of the Babylon 5 universe is that you have a universe that is practically endless. So you don't really get to the point of, oh, we've distributed all the land, now we have to think about how to deal with that or anything like this. Everybody can just kind of muddle through on their own. But then an incident like, oh God, the sun is going to explode and everybody is going to die. Well, maybe this should be the incident to really sit down and figure out, if we have 1 billion people displaced, how do we deal with this? Should we establish some kind of rules? So it's kind of the sad irony that the fate of the Dilgar might have been an event that could have been big enough, a big enough challenge for everybody else to come together and say, okay, we want to have the species survive. That seems to be a very basic, a very basic value that most people probably could share. Now let's figure out how do we do this. Instead, what we get is a massive war that nobody really learns from, which is a shame.
Yes, totally with you there. But what is a bit annoying to me is we can't be the only idiots that experience something so horrible that we decided to do something about it.
I mean,
There are so many species with a lot of history, and you can't tell me that there's nothing that sparked the idea of we have to do something, we have to look at the future, we have to come together. And that's, of course, there could be, that's just not represented so far in the little part of this world we see. But it's a bit annoying to me that there is. I don't feel like I have a glimpse of this idea so far. It's like, yeah, we're here, the humans. We bring you the idea of ages, and you can all jump in and maybe it's again this glorification of the humanity part that gets this
but there I would
annoying.
say it also depends a lot of like how are we viewing this. And right now the big point of the entire Dilgar War is you have the Dilgar going on this war path, and all the other alien species are there bickering among themselves and have not learned from their history and will not band together. And then humanity comes to the stage and also does not band together, like at all, and has not learned from this. And I mean, I 100% share your frustration insofar as to say, really, guys, how have you not had these incidents that should have taught you these things? But then you look at human history and you look at the modern constitutions of nations, all of which have a certain inciting incident, but you can't tell me that was the first time something really bad happened that should have warranted such a constitution. Our history is full of countless examples of things going horribly wrong. Like, you can't tell me people 1,000 years ago hadn't seen enough shit to maybe get the idea that human rights or something adjacent to that might have been a good idea. So I think it's just this thing like, okay, nobody has learned from that, and at least in the case of the Dilgar War, humanity isn't special in that regard at all. It doesn't really bring anything new to the table there. That happens much later. Yes, definitely. We will have to see, like, how is the rest of this story told? Like, are humans the first ones that have this bright idea or not? I think there is an argument that can be made that the Minbari have a very similar moment to this, and that it's the Minbari and humans ultimately founding Babylon 5 because they just happened to have had the last major war there.
Mm.
Let's see how bad the main character syndrome gets there, because I'm hopeful that it's not that terrible.
A last word on this. Of course, these kind of things, you need to have the right people at the right time, so something like this can develop. If you have just idiots standing around proclaiming, yeah, we keep on going like we ever did, because tradition is tradition, or bullshit like that, then of course something like this can't bloom. But it just in this regard of B5, this like special snowflake moment of humanity that just jumps in my face and annoys me out of hell.
But that's what
So
I'm saying. It's important to see, like, how are we looking at that, because at least right now we are not at that point yet. Humanity is jumping around, but they are not saving anyone. Although I'm happy that you mentioned having the right people at the right time, because that's exactly we last talked about the Inquisitor, and that's exactly what he says. Like, going around for 200 years trying to find the right people in the right place. And I mean, hey, to his credit, the person that he finds in the right place is a Minbari woman, so no humanity here for the moment. It's getting complicated. Okay, I've just checked the time a little, and we're making pretty good time. I think the next slide we are going through a little bit faster, just because a key point we've already talked about. The question here being, again, the question being, why does it not want to react to me now? The question being, why is the League of Non-Aligned Worlds so quickly overwhelmed? And essentially, that is exactly what we're talking about. The Dilgar is somebody else's problem. Let's not deal with that. We have not learned from history. Yada yada yada. Basically, all we've already touched on. The other thing that I've included here are two quotes about the way the Dilgar go about their war. They choose the weakest ones to start out with, but then they keep following the path of least resistance. So they attack a bunch of people that are stronger than them, and in those cases they just want to establish a strong front line, but they don't push further into this territory, and then they just kind of wiggle around that and try to find weaker points where they can really go in. And when they have an enemy that they've defeated, quote unquote, they don't try to invade the homeworld, because that would be really costly and difficult. They just kind of blockade the homeworld, maybe throw a bunch of diseases on there, and move on. And just like you mentioned very early on, completely on your own, from the outside perspective, that might seem really stupid. Actually, in terms of waging a sustainable war, that is really stupid. You are never going to hold on to these territories. And this is what's mentioned here also, that the entire invasion of the Dilgar has an extremely desperate nature to it. They are just seeking for a planet that is good for them, just trying to contain everybody, throwing as many horrible weapons at them as possible to just kind of deal with that as best they can. But it's never a case of like a sensible war, which is also why it overwhelms the League of Non-Aligned Worlds a little bit, because it's a kind of war that nobody's prepared for, because it would be stupid to wage this kind of war.
Yeah, of course. Maybe the overall term is the problem, because, well, usually a war is you have one side facing the other, at least two groups facing each other. And if you consider how they're going about, like, yeah, just smashing the outposts of something like that, and just those places they can't conquer, just eradicate through diseases and stuff like that. That's not in the typical sense of war, what we think war would be like. This is just basically, this is just a genocide they're doing here. And I don't think that is something anyone would be prepared for. Like, I mean, yes, you do understand, or you would see that there are people trying to conquer you, to take over your industrial stuff, your military, maybe your finances, cultural things. There may be many reasons. Most of the time, it's just about resources and power, in the sense of, also in the sense of money. But this is just, we just destroy, eradicate a complete race, one after another. And of course, I'm pretty sure I can imagine that it's happening in a way that it's not that obvious that these groups or people are dying from constructed diseases. That maybe it's just more to mid or end, when these diseases is going around like a plague or something, that they realize, oh fuck, someone constructed this, someone gave us this disease to kill us. And maybe that's the point where it's already too late to do something against it, and maybe even too late to tell others.
I think this is the key component here. It all happens very quickly. It's not like all of these planets that are being encircled are completely wiped out. I mean, they do horrible experiments and such, but it's not like 12 different species are completely eradicated at this point. Most of them survive in some way, but they are blockaded. So even if they notice, and I mean, like you're saying, wow, our planet got invaded, bombarded for a whole lot, so there's no water, there's no like communication systems, there's no medical treatment, and now there's a bunch of horrible diseases going around. Well, yeah, that's what you expect from a war zone, like wherever there's a horrible war happening, polio and whatever else comes back. So they will not have the capacity to really realize what is going on, and even if they do, how are they going to communicate this past the blockade? And because there's no conventional war being fought where you actually try to conquer industry or anything like that, it just creates this massive bubble of suddenly new Dilgar space, and nobody really knows what's going on, because in any conventional war, it would take them months to get to my border, but now they're suddenly already here, and everything is just going haywire like that. And I think this is exactly kind of this thing where the entire League of Non-Aligned Worlds just kind of collapses into itself, not necessarily because all the people are dead or all the ships are destroyed, but just because the command structures and chains of command are suddenly disrupted and nobody really knows what's going on. It's sort of the war equivalent of creating a mass panic. You don't actually need to do a lot of damage, you just kind of need to create the illusion that everything is suddenly blowing up and everybody is going to go crazy.
I mean, we kind of had this experience with the corona pandemic.
I mean, yeah,
It's a very soft version compared to what was going on in this story, probably. But even that was devastating for a lot of people out there, and deadly to not just a few. And therefore, even with just this little tidbit, you can pretty good imagine how something on a really large scale and intense scale would turn out.
Yeah, how much this just disrupts everything and puts everything else on hold. I mean, on a much smaller scale, this is also like, if you think about it in terms of law enforcement, that's why it's this much harder to stop somebody who's just going on a suicide run terrorist attack compared to somebody who wants to actually rob a bank. If somebody doesn't have a long-term plan of getting away, that immediately throws a lot of things, a lot of contingencies that usually would have out the window. And I think this is also kind of what plays into here why the League of Non-Aligned Worlds just folds so quickly, is that it's a kind of war that they're just not prepared for. Let's move on from this because we are already talking about this a little bit. Earth sees all of this, and I mean, the Narns see all of this, the Centauri see all of this, and then they both stare at each other and think, yeah, but we have a different priority right now, so they are kind of out of the picture for most of this. But humanity sees all of this, and what does humanity do you think? Do they consider themselves the next possible victim? Do they think, great, this is an opportunity for us? Or like, how would you imagine this goes?
Ooh. The first thing that comes to mind, since I know that humanity was part of this, I could imagine it's like, oh yeah, we are going out there and play a little, a little bit the police of the universe. Though I wouldn't put it past them that it's of course with a few backdoors, like, oh yeah, we have maybe a few planets then that we can seize, and some trading new trading buddies that come out of this, new resources, and since the Dilgar were like stealing technology of others, maybe they to seize this and contribute it to themselves. I could imagine this kind of way there.
Very opportunistic. That
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is also what Earth has been doing up to this point in the show a lot, like being fairly opportunistic. This is why we, have them, kind of try and stay neutral and play both sides during the Centauri-Narn War and stuff like that. Your rationale makes complete sense and ultimately is also what humanity is going to do. You're just forgetting a small little detail, and that is politics. Like, the way the factbook is described is Earth is deeply concerned about these things happening, and then for the next few months, the Senate is just kind of bickering about it. And, some people say we should help, some people say we shouldn't help, some people say we should help militarily directly, others just want to send supplies, and there's just complete gridlock immediately inside of the government, which, honestly, yeah, fair. That's probably what happens in a big, like, political machine as the Earth Alliance. But then it also mentions that the average citizen is just kind of not very motivated because this is happening very far away. So why should
why bother?
One little detail that I've thrown in here that I just find kind of cute as a sort of detail is from the very beginning, the species that have been attacked obviously don't stand idly by. Apart from trying to fend off the enemy, they are sending a bunch of envoys around to try and get everybody else to help. To your point, the idea that maybe we all should band together and help does exist in these species, and they do send diplomats around. It's just they don't really get anything done quickly, probably because of the same kind of gridlock that happens there. But one of these envoys comes to Kalika, the ambassador of the Abai, the fish people, and Kalika seems to be a very good ambassador because he reads up on some human history and gives this big speech before the Senate where he packs out, some of the worst tendencies of humanity, and that's actually, pointing to, hey, in your history you have events like this that caused you to band together. Shouldn't we see this as this kind of thing? And that I really enjoy. It's kind of this little footnote in history of saying, yeah, this like recognition that stuff like this has happened in history and we should learn from that is actually there. And once again, in this instance, coming from an alien, not from humanity itself.
Mhm. I really like this, that it's established in this way, um, because it just demonstrates the
Mm.
far side, even aliens are in this series are considered to have. Uh, I'm not sure though. Yeah, obviously the whole Nazi fuck up shit is especially at that time where the series is created, uh probably the freshest and strongest in mind there.
I mean, it's one of these instances where I can definitely see being critical of the author here for a reason, but if I take just the text and divorce it from the fact that it's a fiction written for humanity, um, as a piece of history, I can completely buy that the ambassador of the Abai makes this comparison and is perfectly fine with it. As
Yeah,
a human looking at human history, I would raise my finger and say, yeah, but, okay, both the Nazis and the Dilgar are talking about getting new Lebensraum because they need to live there. There's just a small difference that the Dilgar actually have a threat that they are running from, whereas Nazi Germany very much didn't, which is something that science fiction does a lot of, like, giving more justification to these historical talking points than there actually was. So in real life history, I would be more
yeah,
careful with this kind of comparison. But as an alien coming to Earth and just trying to get a good talking point, I can completely buy this, and there's no problem
yeah,
with that. It's just there. I think we have to divorce a little bit the text and what it means in our context and in the context
yeah.
of the universe.
If we go about this like you said, then I'm perfectly fine with this. Otherwise, I too just would have the problem. It's like, yeah, we have this the idea of what happened there with the Nazis, and it's like always gets out of
I
the
mean,
trunk for every situation, which is highly problematic. But because yes, of course, it is something that is really horrible thing happened in our history, and of course has a really great impact on our minds even today, or at least I think it should have. Um, ignoring the idiots out there that don't. Um, but the problem is that it's just disregards everything, the modern situation you compare with this, um, because it's usually much more complex, like you said with the Dilga, like yeah, they were running from a threat, um unlike the Nazis, and especially it's like mm, it gives the whole um a frame to a modern situation um that is really set. There's then no point of or no place or room for arguing or taking a better look at this. It's just like, yeah, this is our little box we have here, and this is exactly like that, and disregarding the actual situation.
it's the thing where if you start using a very specific historical example like this one as a generic term, you're kind of doing
Yeah,
justice to both sides, because then you're kind of diminishing and kind of simplifying the view on the historical example a lot, and you're also trying to draw parallels to other situations which are just as complicated but in different ways, and then you're just kind of losing focus of what you're talking about. that on top of the fact that it also becomes kind of very inflationary very quickly. Like now we live in a climate where in certain countries both sides just accuse each other of being fascist dictators and Nazis. Okay, then it doesn't mean anything anymore. Then we're just kind
Yeah.
of throwing this around as the next generic term. That doesn't really do anything for anyone, and it creates like very, very awkward situations. We've now reached the beginning of the Dilgar War. Congratulations. So we will talk more about the actual goings on of this war, like how Earth wins this, because I think the entire like build up to this is a big enough thing, and we've talked about it long enough that it warrants its own episode. There's just one or two details about how Earth then chooses to enter this war that I really wanted to mention, and I haven't even phrased this as a question because I mean, what are you supposed to tell me? Yeah, at some point ships start shooting at each other. Yeah, obviously. That's it. But there's one or two things, and they fit very neatly into the discussion that we've already had. The one part is, you remember the markup? They are all dead now because they had a horrible disease. Too bad. But at the time of the Dilgar War, they were one of the closest allies that Earth has. And apart from the big speech given that draws historical parallels, that really moves the Senate, this was one of the main reasons that Earth really saw a close ally of itself being attacked and then actually started making motions of saying, oh, we probably want to stop that from happening. And the way they go about this is they send an expeditionary force to blow up some Dilgar ships, notably, and the book makes a note of this, without ever declaring war, which I find an interesting detail to put in there, because it acknowledges we are in a world where international law doesn't exist, and for all intents and purposes, there is no interspecies rule that tells Earth it should declare war on somebody before blowing them up. But obviously, in our own understanding of how war functions on Earth, that is very much a thing that should be happening. You are not supposed to do just a surprise attack on somebody. And so it's interesting because we are kind of taking advantage of the fact that it's a lawless space, because there is no declaration of war, which allows Earth Alliance to surprise Dilgar a lot more, which helps us with early victories and gets the momentum going. But at the end of the day, we are still setting a precedent that we are also using the fact there are no rules, and we are fine with that. We are not sort of trying to be better than that from the get-go.
I'm still digesting this information, because I think this is really fucked up. Because I'm pretty sure that if someone at this point attacked Earth or Earth Alliance, they would be standing there like, yeah, you didn't declare war on us,
Absolutely.
you crazy bitch.
Of
And now they're going there, yeah, why should we care? And yeah, the problem also is with this is, as you already said, it on Earth, this would be considered the right way, with that you have to declare war on someone before you do start the war. And ignoring this, I mean, it's like ignoring your own laws just to achieve something. I mean, what does this say about yourself? That you can't be trusted, that your word, your laws, doesn't even mean a thing to yourself.
and it puts us into this position, and this is something that I appreciate about the way the fact book is written, because obviously we are not starting to debate like equivalencies now. Like in this conflict, obviously Earth Alliance is the good guys, and that's not because they're humans, it's because they commit way less atrocities. They're not running around eradicating entire planets. There's no question about that. And the next quote goes into this thing that, like, by entering this war, humanity starts freeing up some of the front lines, which immediately all the encircled homeworlds of other alien species take advantage of, and they band together and they form this horribly coordinated but symbolically very important like liberation navy. And it's like it's a big turning point of the war, and there's no question about that. For the world and the universe as a whole, this is a good thing that happens, and nobody is going to blame humanity for that. But it does give us immediately this hint that just because there is an unquestionable bad guy in this conflict doesn't mean our good guys are completely unblemished. And we see the seeds here that even though in this moment it's a really great thing to do and it has some really great results, this will not, like, this war is not going to end and everybody is going to be fine. This is not going to be a war that ends and everybody is going to look thankful to humanity. Just like you mentioned, they will look at humanity and say, oh, shit, you can do that. And I don't have trouble with you right now, but like, how are we ever going to enter in any kind of diplomatic negotiations now? Because there's always going to be this knowledge that you might just throw out the rules and you can say, well, I'd only do that if there's really, really good reason to. But that's kind of the issue with precedents, right? Like, who decides what a good reason is?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think this is of course humanity in this case in some way won a war, but also they fucked up themselves really horrible because yeah, they can't be trusted to their word. And that's, I think that's even more destructive than maybe even losing this war would have been.
It's definitely one of these things where, once again, we are watching this from Earth Alliance history. And
Yeah.
from Earth Alliance history perspective, we won the war and everything went fine. But this is one of these decisions, if history had gone any other way, humanity would have been absolutely screwed over by this, because there's no way of making friends right now. It works out because humanity will go out of this war very strongly, so they don't need everybody else. Like, they can get everybody else to the negotiation table because they are just that powerful. But that was never a guarantee at that point, so there's some more interesting things happening. And this is where we are going to start the next session on Earth Alliance history as well, where now the war has properly started in terms of humanity has entered into it. And we will go down a little bit the milestones of like what is actually happening. Like, how do this other species react to this? Who actually, pushes the war effort along the most? And I'm pretty sure next episode we are also already going to start to talk about the aftermath of this war, because I'm pretty sure this is one of these instances like we are not going to sit here and have a lot to talk about the individual space battles that are happening. Like, as much as I love the spaceships, there is not much discussion potential there. So I think splitting this up in a way, we will talk about the kind of prologue to this and then kind of how it all winds down makes a little bit more sense.
I'm with you there. So, with that said, we hope you enjoyed this episode, especially since it's a special case again.
And as usual, you can find us on all the regular social media platforms.
Until next time.